This is Fresh Air, live from the Public Radio Conference in Washington, D.C. Our house band, led by Ben Vaughn. Some of the greatest soul and rhythm and blues recordings wouldn't have been made if it weren't for my guest, Jerry Wexler. Wexler was a partner in Atlantic Records from the early 50s through the mid-70s. His specialty was finding great singers and matching them with the right band and backup singers to create a sound that was both artistically true and commercially successful. The short list of people he's worked with includes the Drifters, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Bob Dylan, Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, Eddie James, and Solomon Burke. Here's just a few of the records we have Jerry Wexler to thank for.
I've been loving you too long to stop now. You see the girl with the diamond ring? She knows how to shake that thing all right now. Hey, 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 hey. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. That's when my love comes tumbling down. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour when there's no one else around.
Under the boardwalk,
out of the sun,
under the boardwalk,
we'll be having some fun.
under the boardwalk,
People walking above,
under the boardwalk,
we'll be making love
under the boardwalk,
boardwalk.
What you want, baby, I got it. What you need, do you know I got it? All I'm asking is for a little respect when you come home. Just a little bit, hey, baby, just a little bit.
There are a lot of great stories about making this music in Jerry Wexler's new memoir. It's called Rhythm and the Blues, and it's just been published by Knopf. Jerry Wexler, welcome to Fresh Air.
It's great to be here, to plug my book.
I want to get started with your work with Aretha Franklin. I think that's a good place to start. Now, she had made about, 10 or so recordings on Columbia Records before coming to
Yes.
Atlantic. John Hammond produced her, and he was producing her like a jazz singer, kind of in the Dinah Washington tradition. You, when she came to Atlantic, you worked with her. You heard something completely different. What did you hear when you started producing her?
Well, I heard the Aretha Franklin who sang in church, who sang Precious Lord when she was 13 years old, and a man in the audience was so overcome, he said, listen at her. And I listened, and it wasn't so much that I tried a new approach to her. It's that what she did fit very well in with what we were doing anyhow.
Well, you sat her down at the piano. You
Right.
had her play herself, which I don't think she'd done on the records before that.
Not very much.
And then you took her down to Muscle Shoals, to Alabama, to the same place actually that Arthur Alexander started
Exactly.
recording in.
I want you to know that I'm not one of the people who didn't pay him.
What was it like at Muscle Shoals? What did you hear there in that southern sound that you wanted?
Well, it was the way they recorded, which was ad-lib recording without written arrangements, building the song from the get-go, just from the chords, and the musicians made a fabulous contribution. So these were arrangements which we all did together. And they were just as much arrangements as anything that was ever done by Henry Mancini, in the sense of being an arranged piece of music.
So you took Aretha down to Muscle Shoals, recorded like a track and a half with her, and there was this really big fight. What was the fight about?
There was an explosion that went on because of too much Jack Daniels and not enough Prudence. And it had to do with Ted White, who was Aretha's husband at the time, who got into a dangerous, over-friendly drinking from the same jug with a gentleman who can best be described as a card-carrying redneck, trumpet player. And it got into what we called the dozens, the Southern dozens, and then it got nasty. And the session blew up, and we went back to New York with one song complete, which was I Never Loved a Man, and a three-piece track on the other side, which was Do Right Woman. and all we had there was rhythm guitar, bass, and drums, which is not a whole lot to go on.
Not even vocal?
No vocal, no piano, no background vocal. And then we finished by bringing Aretha and her sisters into the studio. And it was a pretty good piece of extemporization in that, starting with this very minimal track, Aretha laid down an organ part and a piano part. And then she sang the lead, and then she and her sisters got together and did the background. And it was a very full, finished record put together, well, I'd say, with spit and chewing gum.
You produced Respect. Is there a story behind how the Sakatumis landed on there?
Well, the story is that when Otis Redding did it was entirely a different song. The Sakatumis were Aretha Franklin's idea, where she injected into the song, which connoted a certain idea of social respect, probably the notion of ethnic respect, combined with a little judicious lubricity on her part. The respect that she was talking about was what you might call, very bluntly call, proper sexual attention. But it was her transmutation of Otis Redding's Little Southern Song. As a matter of fact, I was mixing the record in our studio on Broadway, and Otis walked in. He said, "That little gal done took my song." But he meant that in a very kindly way, because he saw the cash registers ringing.
My guest is Jerry Wexler, and he's written a new memoir. It's called Rhythm and the Blues. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. This is Fresh Air. Back with Jerry Wexler. His new book is called Rhythm and the Blues, and it's all about the people he's produced and a lot about the music industry behind the scenes. Now, your first studio was actually the office.
That's right.
Of Atlantic Records. Who did
Right.
you? Because when Atlantic was young, you didn't have a studio. So what'd you do? You'd move out the chairs into the hallway whenever
Well,
you went to record?
We did have a studio. It was our office, and it was a studio because we had equipment in it. And
Right.
my partner, Ahmed Erdogan, and I shared this big room. We had two desks that were catty-corner, canted toward each other. And what we would do is push them against the wall, stack them, and then our engineer, Tom Dowd, would set out camp chairs, a few microphones, and one mic in the hall for echo.
We're just going to adjust your mic a little bit
Yeah.
there. There's so much that a record producer is up against, often the real unexpected, and I think a great example of that is when you were producing the Drifters version of Under the Boardwalk. Let's start with the beginning of that story. First of all, they didn't want to even record the song.
That's right.
You gave them an ultimatum.
Right. I was not the line producer of that song. I was acting as a supervisor, as an executive of the company, and the Drifters were always a concern of mine. And a great producer, deceased Bert Burns, was producing the record, and neither he nor any of the Drifters could stand the song. They just couldn't buy it. And I didn't want to interfere because Bert was the producer, but this sounds like very self-congratulatory. And I said, this song has to be done. And I said, you can pick all the rest. I said, or else ain't no session.
Why did you like the song so much?
Because it sounded like a hit.
Okay, good enough reason. Okay, so what happened to the lead singer the night before the session?
The lead singer at the time was a man named Rudy Lewis. We had three fantastic lead singers in the Drifters. The first was Clyde McFadden. The second was Rudy Lewis. His name is not as well known, but he did some great songs. And the third was Benny King, who's having a great resurgence with Stand By Me. I mean, you can't turn around without hearing it anymore. But Rudy Lewis, unfortunately, the night before the session, was found dead in the hotel room with a hypodermic needle in his arm. And I think that was the night before the session. And we tried to call off the session, but it was a big date, and we had hired a lot of union musicians, and the union wasn't cutting us any slack at all. They gave us 24 hours. So we moved the session ahead one more day, but then we couldn't even change the charts. So we had to use Johnny Moore to sing the lead, and without even the key change, and he managed to sing it in the key that was put to him. And the interesting thing about the record was we promoted it all along the Eastern Seaboard in Atlantic City and so on, and it evokes summer all the time.
And you actually did a lot of that yourself, didn't you? You packed up the car and drove around promoting the record.
Oh, yeah.
Because you wanted it to break so bad.
That's
yeah.
right, and we did a lot of that in those days.
Now, you worked with Otis Redding a lot during
Yes.
his career.
I was not Otis's producer. I want you to realize that. Otis was produced at Stax Records in Memphis by that great team of Jim Stewart and Booker T and the MGs, especially Steve Cropper.
Now, you saw him change a lot as he became better
yes.
known. What was he like in the beginning before he was very famous? What was he like on
Otis
stage?
was very simple, very unaffected, but he had the magic. And when he came to New York after his first hit record, I picked him up at the airport. No roadies, nobody, no nothing, just sole Otis. And he opened at the Apollo, and he just stood there, just straight on, with his arms at his side, didn't move. Another one who started like that was Marvin Gaye. But they learned some stagecraft, but what really kicked Otis into moving was having to follow Sam and Dave, who used to be described as a stage full of Jackie Wilsons.
That's really great. No, we were talking before how you brought Aretha Franklin down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama. You brought Wilson Pickett down to Memphis to record.
Right.
You really loved that southern sound that was coming out of some of the bands there. Why'd you think of bringing him there?
Well, because everything was winding down in New York. I mean, it was entropy. We just couldn't get out of our own way. We had been very successful year after year, but our style of recording was a regular old-time standard style, using arrangers with written arrangements. Now, when you have to change an arrangement, and you almost always do, to accommodate the vicissitudes of the song and where you're going, it's total agony for the entrepreneur to see that clock going around while a man is going around with an eraser, erasing little notes on 13 charts. And this southern style of recording, where it's just all you have is chord indications. You go out, you sing a lick, do it like this, fellas. Bang, here's the new chord, But maybe that's overstating it, but actually there's a spontaneity and a fantastic new element that comes in because the musicians are organic to the idea.
So you heard that
I heard the
Wilson
sound.
Pickett.
I heard the sound, and I brought Pickett to Memphis, and we cut Midnight Hour and a lot of other things there, all in a hurry. It was great.
One of the great things about this book is that there's all kinds of fights between legendary people that are out. When you got the call that Aretha Franklin was ready to sign with Atlantic Records, there was a wonderful fight.
Oh, right.
happening in the studio between Wilson Pickett and was it Percy Sledge?
Percy Sledge. Percy Sledge is also a native of Muscle Shoals, like Arthur. He came from Alabama, and very genial, sweet man. And I was working on a vocal with Wilson Pickett, and Percy comes into the control room, and he said, "Wilson, that was great, man. You sound just like Otis." I mean, the red neck came up, and Wilson bristled, and I got Percy out, and I said, "Percy, later." Well, he comes ambling back in about 3 hours later. He said, "Man, that was a hell of a lick. That was just like James." That's the worst thing he could have said, because James Brown and Wilson Pickett have had a century-old falling out about a chick, and he couldn't have done worse. And Wilson went for Percy like that. I got in the way, and I probably went about 180 pounds, and he just flicked me like that, and I went to the wall. Because I used to call Wilson the Black Panther before there was a Black Panther movement, because he was, there was, to me, the ideal metaphor for Wilson, because he was sleek, he was beautiful, and he was like a baling wire and nuts and bolts. And he was terrific. Just a beautiful man, but a man who had definite ideas about his own whims.
So you got the call from Aretha in the middle of this fight after you were slammed against the wall?
I bounced off okay, and I got a call from a woman named Louise Bishop, who is still, I think, pretty well known in Philadelphia, working under the name of Louise Williams, gospel disc jockey, a friend of mine. And in those days, Aretha's circle was the gospel wheel. That's who she hung out with. This was before, the big secular explosion. And Louise was a pal of hers. and Louisa, a pal of mine, had sort of been hawking her on my account, and she said, "Here's the number. Aretha's ready." And like the fella said, you never look back, you know.
There's a lot more stories I want to hear, but we have to take a short break. My guest is Jerry Wexler, the great producer from Atlantic Records. He was a partner in Atlantic for about 3 decades. He's got a new book called Rhythm and the Blues. We'll be right back. This is Fresh Air. Back with Jerry Wexler. And Jerry, since our audience today is people from around the country, our colleagues in public radio here for the Public Radio Conference, I really want you to talk a little bit about the early days of getting black music played on white radio stations. And you were doing promotion as well as production at Atlantic Records back in the 50s and the early 60s when radio was still pretty segregated. And I'd like to hear a little bit about what it was like to get white DJs to play the rhythm and blues recordings that you were producing then.
Heavy agita. You just couldn't do it. I mean, you couldn't, except for white disc jockeys on black stations. This was an odd phenomenon. The leading disc jockeys on rhythm and blues stations were Caucasians who, without being mimetic, they managed to sound black, and the audiences accepted them as black. I'm talking about people like Zenas Sears from New Jersey, Hunter Hancock from L.A., Huggy Boy from L.A., of course, Alan Freed, who came along and of course, he got so big that he couldn't disguise his racial identity anymore. So it was very difficult. And this was not due to racist attitudes on the part of the PDs or the musical directors. It had to do with the advertisers. This black music did not fit with the demographics. It was simple as that. So it was no use ranting and raving. It was part of the socio-economics of the era. The music, I mean, it would be like playing mazurkas on a classical station. It just didn't go.
And back in those days, too, to get a record played, you had to pay for it, more or less,
yeah.
to pay for consideration, as you put it.
Absolutely. It was a subterranean advertising, let's say. These people were badly underpaid. Of course, I'm sure that I'm sure that's changed a lot. And the guy... And the guy at the mic is just rolling in the fantastic emoluments.
So what were some of the things you would do for the disc jockeys?
An Orlon sweater, bottle of Jim Beam, until it got real competitive, and then we got into the hundreds per month.
Right.
Yeah. Another thing is that what you would do is that you'd bring your artist there, and he could have a stage show or a concert and be the entrepreneur. And he'd get them for a very low price, like zilch, sometimes nothing. And so you paid your dues to get these, and we were glad to do it.
You still producing?
Yeah.
I know you produced an Etta James record last year.
Right.
And,
I'd like to talk about it.
The Etta James record? Yeah. We're not going to have
I think
time.
it's one of the best things I ever did.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, and it was a Grammy nominee.
Uh-huh.
And it got lost in the shuffle, so it's going to be one of my Smithsonian entries.
I want to thank you so much for talking with us a little bit about your career and about making the music. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, and you all go back and sell my book wherever you go.
Jerry Wexler has been my guest. He's written a memoir about his years in the music business. It's called Rhythm and the Blues. Oh, I should ask you really quickly. You invented the term rhythm and blues.
Well, Casey Stengel says you could look it up. It's in the books. It was 1949 and 1950. And the term for that particular column was race records, and it was starting to sound pejorative.
Right, so you came up with a substitute.
Yeah. Right.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being with us, Jerry Wexler. I also want to thank Arthur Alexander for performing for us earlier today, and I want to thank Ben Vaughn and his band, Ben Vaughn, Bobby J., Seth Bear, and Mike Vogelman. And I'm going to ask the band to play us out. There's lots of people I'd like to thank for today's broadcast from the Public Radio Conference. I'd like to thank from WHYY, David Othmer, Nessa Foreman, Bob Prindable, Mark Vogelzang, and Chris Spurgeon, and a big thanks to Art Ellis. The Fresh Air staff is Dorothy Farabee, Danny Miller, Phyllis Myers, Naomi Person, Amy Sallet, Roberta Shurak, Joan Toohey, and Sue Weinstein. Our technical staff, Joyce Lieberman, Ron Barron, Jay Goldman, and Audrey Vablitis. Thanks to Lauren Kelly from National Public Radio. Thanks, everybody, for being in our studio audience, our public radio colleagues from around the country. I'm Terry Gross.
Major funding for Fresh Air is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional support comes from the listeners of WHYY in Philadelphia, where Fresh Air is produced. This is NPR, National Public Radio.